The bullet didn't kill Kang Min-ho, it did something worse. It stole the one thing no empire, no fortune, and no army could buy back. For 3 years, the most feared Mafia boss in Seoul lived behind a mask of ice, untouched and untouchable, until a curvy African nurse with fearless eyes pressed her warm palm against his scarred chest and whispered words that made his dead blood ignite. She didn't know she'd just started a war, inside him, around him, and between them. Welcome to Black Seoul romance TV series, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The private medical suite on the 47th floor of the Kang Tower had no name on the door, no number on the wall, and no record in any hospital system in South Korea. It existed for one patient only. Kang Min-ho sat on the edge of the clinical bed, shirtless, the jagged scar running from his left shoulder blade down to the base of his spine catching the cold fluorescent light. His jaw was locked. His dark eyes stared at the far wall as though he could burn through concrete with fury alone. Dr. Yoon, his personal physician for 6 years, stood 3 feet away, clipboard trembling slightly in his hands. "The results are the same, sir," Dr. Yoon said, his voice barely above a murmur. "There's been no change. The nerve damage from the shooting is, 'Get out,' 2 words, delivered like gunshots." Dr. Yoon bowed and retreated so fast his shoes squeaked against the marble floor. The door clicked shut. Min-ho closed his eyes. His fists tightened against the edge of the bed until his knuckles turned white. 3 years. 3 years since the ambush at the Incheon port. 3 years since a rival syndicate sniper put a bullet close enough to his spine to shatter something no surgeon could rebuild. He could walk, he could fight. He could run an empire that controlled half the ports in East Asia, but his body, the most private, most intimate part of his body, had gone silent, dead, unresponsive. And every specialist, every experimental treatment, every imported medication had failed. Kang Min-ho, the man whose name made politicians sweat and rival bosses lose sleep, couldn't feel a thing below the waist when it mattered most. The irony was so cruel it tasted like iron on his tongue. He grabbed the glass of water on the side table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 100 pieces, water streaking down the pristine surface like tears he would never shed. His underboss, CO Jun-woo, entered without knocking. The only man alive allowed that privilege. "New nurse arrives in 20 minutes, Jun-woo said flatly, scrolling through his phone. Dr. Yoon's recommendation, specialist in nerve rehabilitation and trauma recovery. Trained in London, practiced in Lagos and Nairobi. Apparently she's the best." Min-ho didn't look up. "I don't want another nurse." "You don't want another Korean nurse," Jun-woo corrected carefully. "Because every one of them either trembles when they see you, sells information to tabloids, or tries to climb into your bed for leverage. This one is different. She's foreign. She doesn't know who you are. And frankly," he paused, choosing his words, "Dr. Yoon says she's the last option before we consider the experimental surgery in Switzerland, the one with the 40% paralysis risk." Silence filled the room like smoke. Min-ho finally looked at his underboss. "Name?" "Adiz Okafor, Nigerian, 31 years old. No ties to any syndicate, no known affiliations, clean record. She thinks she's being hired by a private medical corporation to treat a reclusive CEO recovering from a spinal injury. She thinks," Min-ho repeated, the ghost of a bitter smile crossing his lips. "She doesn't need to know more than that. Not yet." Min-ho turned back to the shattered glass on the floor. "Send her in when she arrives, and Jun-woo, sir, if she trembles, send her home." 23 minutes later, the elevator doors opened on the 47th floor, and Adiz Okafor stepped out. She was not what anyone in that building expected. She was tall, 5'9", without the low-heeled professional shoes she wore. Her body was full, curved generously at the hips and chest, her waist dipping inward before flaring out again in a silhouette that seemed sculpted rather than accidental. Her skin was deep brown, rich and luminous, like oiled mahogany under warm light. Her hair was pulled back in neat braids gathered into a bun, and her eyes, large, dark, and sharp, scanned the corridor with the calm assessment of a woman who had worked in war zones and understaffed hospitals, and was not easily impressed by expensive architecture. She wore a fitted navy blue medical uniform that hugged every curve without apology. Over her arm, she carried a leather medical bag that had clearly seen years of use. Around her neck hung a simple gold chain with a tiny pendant shaped like a bird in flight, a gift from her late grandmother. 2 guards flanked the corridor, both armed, both staring. She didn't flinch, didn't slow down, didn't adjust her uniform or shrink her body the way she'd learned, painfully, over years, that the world sometimes wanted her to. She walked like she had every right to be there, because she did. Ms. Okafor? One guard stepped forward. Nurse Okafor, she corrected, her accent a melodic blend of British training layered over deep Igbo roots. I was told the patient is through here. The guard glanced at his partner. Neither had been prepared for the correction or the composure. They stepped aside. Adis pushed open the door to the private suite. And there he was. Kang Min-ho sat in a chair now, dressed in a black-fitted t-shirt and dark trousers, legs crossed, arms folded, watching her enter the way a predator watches movement at the edge of its territory. His face was devastating, sharp jawline, high cheekbones, dark eyes so intense they seemed to pull light out of the room. His black hair was swept back, slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. The scar on his neck, just visible above his collar, told her more than any medical file. This man had almost died, and he was furious about surviving. She'd seen that look before, in veterans, in accident survivors, in men whose bodies had betrayed them and whose pride couldn't absorb the blow. She set her bag down on the counter calmly. "Mr. Kang," she said. He didn't respond, just watched. She didn't repeat herself. Instead, she opened her bag, pulled out a pair of examination gloves, and began organizing her instruments on the tray as though he were any other patient in any other clinic in any other country. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "You're not what I expected." She glanced at him. "You're exactly what I expected." Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not offense. Something closer to surprise. A crack in the mask so small most people would have missed it entirely. "And what did you expect?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, edged like a blade wrapped in silk. She snapped on her gloves. "A man in pain who'd rather intimidate his nurse than admit he needs help." She met his gaze directly. "Shall we begin, or would you like another 5 minutes to glare at me?" In the hallway, through the cracked door, Seo Junwoo heard this exchange and almost choked on his coffee. Kang Min-ho stared at the woman standing in his private suite. This foreigner, this stranger, this impossibly bold, impossibly curvaceous woman who looked at him as though his empire was wallpaper, and felt something shift in his chest. Not his body, not the dead thing below his waist that had refused to wake for 3 years. Something deeper, something worse. His pride screamed at him to dismiss her. His gut, the same gut that had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts, told him not to let her leave this room. "Begin," he said. The first examination was clinical, professional, thorough. Adis worked with a calm efficiency that Min-ho had never experienced from a medical professional. She didn't fumble. She didn't over-explain. She didn't apologize unnecessarily. She asked direct questions about sensation, about his injury timeline, about the medications he'd been prescribed, and she listened to his answers the way a musician listens to an instrument, catching the notes he tried to hide. When she asked him to remove his shirt so she could examine the scar tissue along his spine, he hesitated for the first time, not because of modesty, because the scar was ugly. Brutal, a roadmap of trauma he let no one see. She noticed the hesitation. "I've treated machete wounds in Lagos, Mr. Kang," she said quietly, without looking up from her notes. "Burn victims in Nairobi. Whatever your scar looks like, I promise you, I've seen worse. And I didn't look away then either." He pulled the shirt over his head. She examined the scar with careful, warm fingers. He could feel her touch, feather-light but certain, tracing the raised tissue, pressing gently at specific points along his spine. "Does this hurt?" she asked, pressing near the base. "No. This? No." She moved lower. Her fingers pressed firmly at a cluster of tissue near his lower back. Something sparked, faint, almost imaginary, like a single firefly in a pitch-black field. He flinched. Her hands stilled immediately. "You felt that?" He said nothing. "Mr. Kang." Her voice was firm. "You felt that. Don't lie to me. I'm not your enemy. His jaw tightened. A small sensation, it's nothing. I've felt it before. It never leads anywhere. She straightened up, pulled off her gloves, and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. There was no pity in it, no false hope. Just a deep, steady knowing, as if she'd found a locked door everyone else had walked past and she already had the key in her pocket. Your previous physicians focused on the nerve damage itself, she said. They tried to repair what was broken. That's logical. But the body doesn't always heal through logic, Mr. Kang. Sometimes the block isn't physical. Sometimes it's the dye protecting itself from trauma it hasn't processed. He pulled his shirt back on. You're telling me this is in my head. I'm telling you your body remembers the night you were shot, and it shut down everything non-essential to survival. Your legs work because you needed to run. Your arms work because you needed to fight. But intimacy, she paused, choosing her words with the precision of a surgeon. Intimacy requires safety, vulnerability. And your nervous system decided, 3 years ago, that vulnerability would get you killed. The room went utterly still. No one, not one specialist in 3 years and 4 countries, had ever said that to him. He looked at her, really looked at her, past the curves and the confidence and the accent and the braids. He looked at the intelligence in her eyes, the steadiness in her hands, the absolute absence of fear in her posture. And for the second time in minutes, something shifted inside him, deeper, darker, more dangerous than the first. How long will treatment take? He asked, and his voice sounded different, even to him. That depends on you, she said. On whether you're willing to trust me. Trust. The word landed between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Kang Min-ho hadn't trusted anyone, fully, truly, since the night his own lieutenant had sold his location to the sniper. I'll consider it, he said. She picked up her bag. I'll be here tomorrow at 8. Don't eat before the session. And Mr. Kang, he looked up. She held his gaze, and for a single electric heartbeat, the room shrank to the size of the space between them. Whatever you're afraid of feeling, she said softly, it won't kill you, I promise. Then she left. Min-ho sat in the silence she'd created and pressed his hand against his chest, where his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his temples. What the hell just happened? The next morning, Adiz arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. Min-ho was already waiting, dressed in training clothes, black joggers, a gray compression shirt, as she'd instructed via a message sent through his assistant. She set up a treatment area in the adjoining room, a space that had been converted overnight, on his orders, into a rehabilitation suite with heated mats, resistance equipment, and a massage table. The session was physical, demanding. She worked on his lower back, his hips, his nervous system, using a combination of deep tissue techniques, acupressure, and guided breathing exercises that he found infuriating. Breathe into the stretch, she instructed, her hands firm on his lower back as he lay face down. I am breathing. You're holding. There's a difference. Your whole body is bracing like it's waiting for a bullet. Let go. I don't let go. She leaned closer. He could smell her. Warm, clean, something like coconut and vanilla and rain-soaked earth. It hit him so hard his fingers curled into the mat. Then we'll be here all day, she said calmly. I brought lunch. Despite himself, despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. She saw it. She pretended she didn't. By the end of the first week, they had fallen into a rhythm. She arrived at 8. They worked for 2 hours. She was professional, thorough, and utterly unintimidated by his silence, his glares, or the armed men who lingered outside every door. He hated the exercises. He hated the breathing techniques. He hated being touched by someone who touched him not with desire or fear, but with clinical compassion, as though his body was a problem to be solved, not a weapon to be feared. But he never canceled a session, and he started noticing things. The way she hummed under her breath when she was concentrating, a low, warm melody he didn't recognize. The way her braids swung when she turned quickly. The way her uniform pulled across her hips when she bent to adjust the equipment. The way she laughed, sudden, full, and completely unguarded. When his assistant, young Park Shi-yeon, said something funny in broken English, he noticed how she carried herself, shoulders back, chin level, every step deliberate, as though she had decided long ago that the world could stare all it wanted, and she would not shrink. He noticed the small bird pendant she never removed, the way she touched it briefly when she thought no one was watching, the flash of sadness that crossed her face before she buried it. On the 5th day, Junwoo found Minho standing at the one-way glass window that overlooked the rehabilitation suite, watching Adiz pack up her instruments after the session had ended. "I'm observing my employee. You're staring at your nurse." Minho turned his head slowly. The look he gave Junwoo would have made most men apologize and leave the country. Junwoo simply raised an eyebrow. He'd known Minho since they were 16, running errands for the old boss in Busan. He was immune. "She's effective," Minho said, turning back to the glass. Through it, Adiz was saying something to Shion, gesturing with her hands, her full lips curved in a smile that seemed to light the entire room. "She's beautiful," Junwoo corrected. Minho said nothing. "And you haven't looked at a woman like that in 3 years. I said get out. You didn't, actually, but I'll leave anyway." Junwoo paused at the door. "Minho, be careful. She's not one of ours. She's a civilian. A good one." "I know what she is." Junwoo left. Minho stayed at the glass for 6 more minutes, watching Adiz laugh at something Shion showed her on a phone screen, her head thrown back, her hand pressed to her chest, her body shaking with a joy so unfiltered it made something behind his ribs ache in a way no bullet ever had. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. "Be careful," Junwoo had said. It was already too late. Adiz was not stupid. She knew within 48 hours of arriving at Kang Tower that her patient was not a reclusive CEO recovering from a spinal injury. The armed guards, the encrypted elevators, the way every person in the building moved around Kang Minho as though he were a gravitational force, orbiting him, deferring to him, fearing him, the way his underboss carried a weapon so casually it might as well have been a wallet, the way Minho himself moved, controlled, watchful, every gesture economical, as though he had been trained since boyhood to waste nothing, not even motion. She'd treated powerful men before, generals in Nigeria, politicians in Kenya, a British arms dealer in a private London clinic who'd smiled at her like a shark and asked her to dinner. She knew what power looked like, and Kang Minho didn't just have power. He was power, the kind that bent rooms, silenced conversations, and made the air itself feel heavier. But she also saw what no one else in that tower seemed willing to acknowledge. He was in pain, not just physical, though the nerve damage was real and significant. Emotional, psychological, spiritual. The man was a fortress built on top of a wound, and every wall he'd constructed was designed to keep one truth locked inside. He felt broken. She recognized it because she carried her own version. At night, alone in the sleek company apartment they'd arranged for her in Gangnam, Adiz sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her grandmother's pendant between her fingers. She hadn't planned to come to Seoul. She'd been working at a rehabilitation clinic in London, respected, successful, stable. Then the call came. Her younger brother, Emeka, needed surgery. The kind of surgery that cost more money than 3 years of her London salary combined. A rare cardiac condition. A specialist in Germany, a price tag that made her chest tighten every time she thought about it. The sole contract, 6 months, private patient, confidential, paid 4 times her London salary. Enough for Emeka's surgery and recovery, enough to save her brother's life, so she'd said yes without hesitation. She hadn't expected the patient to be a man whose eyes made her forget, just for a heartbeat, why she was there. "Stop it," she whispered to herself in the dark apartment, pressing the pendant harder. "He's a patient, that's all. Do the work, save Emeka, go home." But when she closed her eyes, she saw Minho's face, the way he'd looked at her when she'd told him his body was protecting itself, the crack in his mask, the raw, unguarded moment when the most powerful man she'd ever met looked at her, not with authority or control, but with something dangerously close to hope. She turned off the light and pulled the covers over her head. This was going to be a problem. 2 weeks into treatment, the progress was slow but real. Sensation was returning in small increments. Tingling where there had been numbness. Warmth where there had been cold. Adiz documented everything meticulously, adjusting her approach based on his responses, incorporating guided meditation alongside the physical work, which he resisted violently at first. "I'm not closing my eyes and breathing like a monk," he said flatly during their 8th session. You're closing your eyes and reconnecting with a nervous system that's been in fight or flight for 3 years, she replied, unmoved. Sit down, close your eyes, or I walk out and you can explain to Dr. Yoon why your best option left. He sat down. He closed his eyes. And in the darkness behind his eyelids, with her voice guiding him, low, steady, warm as sunlight on wet earth, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Safe. The realization terrified him so completely that he opened his eyes, stood up, and left the room without a word. Adiz didn't chase him. She sat on the mat, took a breath and waited. He came back the next day. Neither of them mentioned it, but something had changed. The air between them had thickened, charged. Every accidental touch during treatment, her fingers on his spine, her palm against his shoulder, her hand steadying his hip during a stretch, sent visible tension through his body. Not pain, something else. Something electric. She felt it too. God help her, she felt it too. Every time her hands were on him, she was aware of the heat of his skin, the controlled power in his muscles, the way his breathing changed when her fingers moved lower on his back. She kept her face neutral, her hands steady, her voice professional. But her heart, her traitorous, inconvenient heart, was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. Later that evening, she was in the building's private cafeteria, a sleek, minimalist space on the 35th floor reserved for senior staff, eating a late dinner alone, reading patient notes on her tablet. A man slid into the seat across from her. She looked up. He was Korean, handsome in a polished, deliberate way. Styled hair, expensive watch, a smile that was all surface. She recognized him, Choi Tae-yoon, one of Min-ho's business associates who visited the tower regularly. You must be the new nurse everyone's talking about, he said in smooth English, leaning back, his eyes trailing over her in a way that made her skin prickle. I'm a rehabilitation specialist, she corrected coolly, and I'm eating. I can see that. His smile widened. You know, it's rare to see someone like you in a place like this. Refreshing. Seoul can be so monochrome. She set down her fork. Someone like me, beautiful, confident, foreign. He leaned forward. I'd love to take you to dinner, somewhere better than a corporate cafeteria. I know places in Itaewon that would. She's busy. The voice came from behind Adiz, and it dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Kang Min-ho stood in the cafeteria doorway, flanked by 2 guards. He was dressed in a black suit now, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His face was expressionless, but his eyes, fixed on Choi Tae-yoon with the intensity of a loaded weapon, told a different story entirely. Tae-yoon stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Min-ho, you were just leaving. Min-ho's voice was silk over a blade. Nurse Okafor has a demanding schedule. She doesn't have time for dinner invitations from men who owe my organization 11 billion won in outstanding debts. The color drained from Tae-yoon's face. He bowed, quick, shallow, humiliated, and walked out without looking back. Adiz stared at Min-ho. He didn't sit, didn't explain. He simply looked at her. One long, searing look that said everything and nothing, and then turned and walked away, his guards falling into step behind him. She sat alone in the cafeteria, her heart racing, her dinner forgotten. He was jealous. The realization hit her like a wave. Kang Min-ho, her patient, her contract, her paycheck, the most dangerous man she'd ever treated, was jealous. And the worst part, the most terrifying, most shameful, most undeniable part, was how much she liked it. The next morning, ADS arrived for the session to find a small black box on the treatment table. No note, no card. She opened it. Inside was a pair of professional-grade orthopedic gloves, the exact brand she preferred, discontinued in Europe, nearly impossible to find. She'd mentioned offhandedly to Shi-yeon 3 days ago that her current pair was wearing thin and the brand had stopped production. She looked at the gloves, then at the door, then back at the gloves. When Min-ho arrived for the session 5 minutes later, she held up the box. Did you do this? You needed new gloves, he said, sitting on the treatment bed as though he hadn't just tracked down a discontinued European medical product overnight and had it delivered to a secret floor of a tower guarded by armed men. These aren't available anymore. You would have had to contact the manufacturer directly. I have people. You had someone call a medical supply company in Hamburg at 3 in the morning to get me gloves. He looked at her. Your tools should be the best. You're treating me. If your equipment is substandard, the treatment suffers. It's logical. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she put on the gloves. They fit perfectly. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked away. Don't mention it. But she saw it. The faintest softening at the corner of his mouth. A micro-expression that lasted less than a second. On any other man it would have been nothing. On Kang Min-ho it was an earthquake. A few days later she found a cashmere blanket on the couch in the rehabilitation suite. The building's air conditioning was aggressive, and she'd been cold during documentation work after sessions. She hadn't told anyone. He'd noticed anyway. The day after that, her favorite tea, a specific Nigerian brand of hibiscus tea called Zobo, appeared in the cafeteria, freshly stocked. She'd mentioned it exactly once, in a passing comment to Dr. Yoon 2 weeks prior. She didn't ask Min-ho about the tea. She didn't need to. The invisible thread between them was pulling tighter every day, and she could feel it. In the way his eyes followed her when she moved across the room, in the way his breathing slowed when her hands were on his skin, in the way he answered her questions during treatment with fewer words and longer silences, as though speaking required more vulnerability than he could afford, and in the way she caught herself increasingly thinking about him at night, not as a patient, not as a case study, as a man. A complicated, wounded, magnetic man whose intensity made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She was falling, slowly, dangerously, with the full awareness that the ground below was very far away and made of stone, 3 weeks into treatment. A Thursday evening session later than usual, because Min-ho had been in meetings all day. The kind of meetings that left his jaw tight and his eyes cold. Adiz could feel the tension in his body the moment she touched his back. Every muscle was locked. His breathing was shallow. His fists were clenched at his sides. Bad day? She asked, pressing into the knots along his shoulders. I don't have good days. That's not true. Last Tuesday you almost smiled. He exhaled. Not quite a laugh, but close. Closer than he'd ever come. She worked in silence for 20 minutes, methodically releasing the tension in his back, his shoulders, his neck. Her hands moved lower, working the muscles along his lumbar spine, pressing into the damaged tissue with careful precision. He was responding. Over the past weeks, the sensation had been increasing. Warmth, tingling, brief flashes of something sharper, more electric. His nervous system was waking up, slowly, like a city after a blackout. Lights flickering on one building at a time. She pressed a specific point near the base of his spine, and he inhaled sharply. She stilled. Talk to me, what did you feel? Heat, he said through gritted teeth. Pressure, He stopped. His voice had changed. Rougher. Lower. It's different tonight. She could feel it under her fingers. A subtle shift in his muscle response. A warmth that hadn't been there before. Something was unlocking. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a murmur near his ear so her words were for him alone, not for the guards beyond the door, not for the cameras she knew were in every hallway. Your body is starting to trust the process, she whispered. Don't fight it. Whatever you're feeling right now, let it build, let it exist. You've been numb for 3 years, Min-ho. It's going to feel overwhelming. That's normal. She'd used his first name. She hadn't meant to. It slipped out like a secret she hadn't known she was keeping. He turned his head slightly. Their faces were close, inches apart. She could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his pupils dilated as he looked at her. What if it's not the treatment? He asked, his voice barely a breath. What do you mean? What if it's not the acupressure, the exercises, the breathing? His eyes searched hers. What if it's you? The room contracted. The air between them became something tangible, thick, electric, alive. She should have pulled back. She should have reestablished professional boundaries. She should have reminded him, and herself, of the contract, the ethics, the 100 reasons this was impossible. Instead, she held his gaze and whispered, "Then I can make you scream louder tonight." The words left her mouth before her brain could catch them. She meant the treatment, a new technique she'd been preparing. a deeper nerve stimulation protocol that she knew would be intense, possibly painful, possibly breakthrough. But the way the words landed, in the charged silence, with their faces inches apart, with his skin hot under her palms, they sounded like something else entirely. Minho's eyes went black, his breath stopped. His entire body, the body that had refused to respond for 3 years, went rigid with something that was unmistakably, undeniably, physically alive. He felt it. For the first time in 3 years he felt it, and they both knew. The moment shattered when a guard knocked on the door. A scheduled security check. Adiz pulled back, her hands trembling for the first time since she'd arrived in Seoul. She turned away, pretending to organize instruments, but her reflection in the glass cabinet betrayed her. Flushed cheeks, parted lips, wide eyes. Minho sat up slowly. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, his hand pressed to his own chest, feeling his heart trying to crack through his ribs. She'd done something no doctor, no drug, no surgery had accomplished in 3 years. She'd woken him up, and now he was absolutely, catastrophically, irreversibly obsessed with her. The next morning, Adiz tried to resign. She stood in Dr. Yoon's office on the 42nd floor, her hands clasped in front of her, her face composed, her voice steady even though her insides were in free fall. "I believe Mr. Kang would benefit from a different specialist for the next phase of treatment," she said. "I can recommend several excellent practitioners in Seoul who—" "Absolutely not." The voice came from the doorway. She turned. Minho stood there, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms, looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Dr. Yoon, leave us," Minho said. Dr. Yoon practically evaporated. The door closed. They were alone. "You're not leaving," Minho said. "Mr. Kang, Minho, you called me Minho last night. Don't go backward." She straightened her spine. "Last night was a lapse in professional judgment. I crossed a line. The appropriate course of action is to transfer your care to— I don't want another nurse." He stepped closer. "I don't want another specialist. I don't want another pair of hands that touch me like I'm a case file. Another step. I felt something last night, for the first time in 3 years, and it wasn't because of a technique or a protocol. It was because of you." "That's transference," she said, but her voice wavered. "It's common in rehabilitation settings. The patient develops an attachment to the provider because—" "I know what transference is," he cut in. "This isn't that. You can't know that. I know that I've had 9 specialists before you. I know that every one of them touched me and I felt nothing. I know that you walked into my room 3 weeks ago and something in my chest woke up before you even put your hands on me." He was close now, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the vulnerability he was showing her like a wound he was choosing not to bandage. "I'm not asking you to feel what I feel. I'm asking you not to run from it." She looked up at him. He was taller than her. She, who was tall herself, and standing this close, she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell his cologne. Something dark, woody, expensive, mixed with something underneath that was just him. Her resolve cracked. She felt it happen, a fracture line running through the professional wall she'd built, letting in light she couldn't afford. "I have a contract," she said quietly. "I have obligations. My brother needs surgery, and this job is paying for it. If I compromise my professional standing, your brother—" His expression shifted. The intensity didn't dim, but something else entered it. Concern. Real, sharp, immediate. "What surgery? What's wrong?" She hadn't meant to say it. The words had escaped through the crack in her wall. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me. It shouldn't. I'm your nurse. You're more than that, and you know it." Silence, the kind that rings. She picked up her bag. "I'll continue the treatment, because it's working, and because you need it, and because my brother needs the money this contract provides. But we keep it professional, no more. Whatever that was last night, no more first names, no more—" She gestured vaguely at the shrinking space between them. "This." She walked past him. At the door, she stopped. "Your body is healing," she said without turning around. "Don't confuse that with something else." She left. Min-ho stood in Dr. Yoon's empty office, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight, his heart a wreck. Then he pulled out his phone and called Jun-woo. "I need everything on Adi's Okafor's brother. Medical condition, hospital, specialist, cost. Everything. Within the hour." "Min-ho, what are you—" "Within the hour, Jun-woo." He hung up and stared at the door she'd walk through. "You want to keep it professional? Fine. But I'm going to take care of you whether you let me or not." 3 days later, Adiz received a call from her brother's hospital in Lagos. She was sitting in her Gangnam apartment, eating a late dinner, when her phone buzzed. She answered on the first ring. She always did when it was about Emeka. "Miss Okafor?" The hospital administrator's voice was bewildered. "I'm calling to inform you that your brother's surgical fees, the full amount, including the specialist from Germany, the post-operative care, and the 6-month rehabilitation program, have been paid in full." The fork slipped from her hand. "I'm sorry." "Paid in full. This morning. A wire transfer from a private medical foundation based in Seoul, the Kang Medical Trust." Her blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake, ma'am. The paperwork is in order. Your brother's surgery has been scheduled for next month. The German specialist has already confirmed." She hung up, sat in the silence of her apartment, pressed her grandmother's pendant between her fingers until the edges bit into her skin. Then she grabbed her coat. She arrived at Kang Tower at 11 p.m. The night guards recognized her and let her through. She took the elevator to the 47th floor, stormed past the security detail, and pushed open the door to Min-ho's private office. He was there, alone, sitting behind a massive desk, reading documents, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression, a quiet, steady certainty, told her he'd been expecting this. "You paid for my brother's surgery," she said. Her voice was shaking, not with gratitude, with fury. "The entire thing, $240,000, without asking me, without telling me." He set down his pen. "Your brother needed surgery. You were working yourself to exhaustion to afford it. The problem had a solution. I applied it. You had no right. He's your family. Your family is—" He stopped, reconsidered, started again. "You said your brother needed help. I helped. I didn't ask for your help." Her voice cracked and she hated herself for it. "Do you understand what you've done? You've taken away the one thing I had, the one reason I could justify being here, treating you, staying in this impossible situation. If you're paying for my brother's care, then I owe you. And I can't owe you, Min-ho. I can't." He stood, slowly, came around the desk, stopped 3 feet from her. "You owe me nothing," he said. "The payment isn't connected to your contract. It's not conditional. If you leave tomorrow, if you walk out of this building and never come back, your brother still gets his surgery. No strings, no debt, no obligation." Her eyes glistened. She blinked hard. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" He looked at her with an expression that stripped away every layer of the Mafia boss, the empire builder, the man the world feared. What was left was raw, terrifyingly human. "Because you touched me," he said, "and I felt alive, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay that, whether you let me or not." A tear escaped. Just one. It rolled down her cheek, catching the office light. He reached out, slowly, carefully, as though she were something sacred and breakable, and caught the tear with his thumb. His hand lingered on her cheek, warm, steady, trembling almost imperceptibly. She closed her eyes, leaned into his palm, just for a second, just long enough to feel the world tilt on its axis and resettle in a new, terrifying, beautiful configuration. Then she stepped back, wiped her face, straightened her shoulders. "I'll stay," she said, "for the treatment, because you need me, and because I'm good at what I do, and because my professional integrity matters more than—" She swallowed. "More than whatever this is." He nodded, but his eyes, dark, burning, patient, said what his mouth didn't. "I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll wait." She left. He sat back down at his desk, picked up the glass of whiskey and drank it in one swallow. His hand, the one that had touched her cheek, was still warm. A week passed after the night she stormed into his office. 7 days of professional distance, clinical conversations, controlled touches during treatment. And underneath all of it, a current so electric it could have powered the entire Kang Tower. Adiz kept her composure. She arrived on time. She worked with precision. She documented progress. She maintained boundaries with the discipline of a woman who understood that one wrong step would send her plummeting into a depth she might never climb out of. But her body was a traitor. Every time her hands pressed against his lower back, she felt the heat of his skin seep into her palms and travel through her bloodstream like slow fire. Every time he looked at her, really looked, not the surface glance of a patient acknowledging a provider, but the deep, searching gaze of a man memorizing her. Her pulse stuttered and her professional armor cracked another inch. Minho, for his part, kept his word. He didn't push, didn't cross lines. Didn't mention the tear he'd caught on her cheek or the way she'd leaned into his hand, like a woman starving for tenderness. But he watched. God, he watched. He watched her from the one-way glass when she didn't know he was there. He watched the surveillance feeds from the building's cafeteria, not for security, but because he wanted to know if she was eating enough, sleeping enough, carrying too much weight on those strong, beautiful shoulders. He watched the way she moved through his world, fearless, graceful, unhurried, as though she belonged there, as though the tower had been built with a space carved out just for her, and she'd finally arrived to fill it, and the progress in his body continued. Not slowly anymore, rapidly. Sensation returned in waves, warmth, pressure, tingling, and then, increasingly, something sharper. Something that made his breath catch during sessions, something that forced him to clench his jaw and stare at the ceiling to maintain control. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She was too good at her job not to. "The nerve pathways are reconnecting," she said during a session, her voice carefully neutral, her eyes on her notes instead of his face. "The response patterns indicate significant regeneration in the lower lumbar and sacral regions. We're ahead of schedule. And what does that mean?" he asked, his voice rough. She paused, chose her words the way a surgeon chooses an incision point. "It means your body is waking up, fully, in every capacity." Their eyes met. The air between them ignited. She looked away first. "I'll update your treatment plan. We should adjust the frequency of sessions." "More frequent? Less." She closed her notebook. "You're healing. You'll need me less as time goes on." The words hung between them like a blade. He leaned forward. "And if I don't want to need you less?" She stood up, gathered her instruments, and left the room without answering. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and covered her mouth with her hand, her chest heaving, her eyes burning. She was in love with him. The realization didn't arrive gently. It crashed through her like a wave hitting a seawall. Violent, undeniable, destructive. She was in love with Kang Min-ho, in love with his intensity, his broken edges, his invisible acts of devotion, the way he made her feel like the only woman in a city of 10 million people. And it terrified her more than anything she'd ever faced in her life. 2 days later, a new threat entered the picture. His name was Director Kwon Hyun-woo, and he arrived at Kang Tower on a Monday morning with a delegation of investors, a tailored smile, and an agenda that had nothing to do with business. Kwon Hyun-woo was everything Kang Min-ho was not on the surface. Charming, approachable, warm. He ran a legitimate pharmaceutical conglomerate that had dealings with Min-ho's organization, and he'd been circling the Kang Empire for years, looking for cracks to exploit. He found one in the cafeteria at lunchtime. Adiz was eating alone, reviewing treatment protocols on her tablet, when Hyun-woo sat across from her with the ease of a man who had never been told number. "You must be the specialist everyone's whispering about," he said, his English polished and effortless. "I'm Kwon Hyun-woo, director of Kwon Pharmaceuticals." She looked up, assessed him the way she assessed everyone, quickly, thoroughly, without sentiment. "Adiz Okafor, and I doubt everyone's whispering about me. Trust me, they are. A brilliant Nigerian nurse treating the most reclusive man in Seoul, that's not a whisper, that's a headline." He smiled. "I'm actually in the medical field myself, pharmaceuticals. I'd love to discuss your work over dinner sometime, purely professional, of course." There it was again, the dinner invitation, the smooth approach, the man who saw her curves before he saw her credentials. But Hyun-woo was different from Choi Tae-yoon. He was smarter, more patient, more dangerous in ways that didn't involve weapons. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but my schedule is quite demanding. All the more reason to take a break." He leaned forward, his eyes traveling over her face with an appreciation that was just subtle enough to be deniable. "Seoul can be lonely for foreigners. I have connections at some excellent restaurants. Nigerian food, even. There's a place in Yangsan that," she said, "her schedule is demanding." Minho's voice cut through the cafeteria like a crack of thunder in a quiet sky. He stood at the entrance, flanked by Junwoo and 2 guards. He was wearing a black overcoat, returning from somewhere outside the tower, a rare occurrence, and his expression was carved from granite. But his eyes were volcanic. Junwoo stood slowly, his smile tightening at the edges. "Minho, I was just introducing myself to your specialist. She's quite impressive. She's not yours to be impressed by." The cafeteria went silent. Staff members suddenly found their meals fascinating. 2 junior employees near the window stopped breathing entirely. Adiz stood up. "Mr. Kang, Director Kwon was being perfectly respectful. We have a session in 15 minutes, Minho said, his eyes never leaving Yun-woo. "I expect you in the treatment room." Then he turned to Hyun-woo with a look that would have frozen lava. "Director Kwon, your meetings are on the 32nd floor. The cafeteria on this level is restricted to authorized personnel. I suggest you find your way back." Hyun-woo held his gaze for a moment, just long enough to make a point, then smiled, bowed slightly to Adiz, and left. The cafeteria slowly resumed breathing. Adiz gathered her things and walked past Minho toward the elevator. As she passed, she murmured, low enough for only him to hear, "That was unnecessary." "That was restraint," he replied just as quietly. She stopped walking, turned her head. Their eyes met, and what she saw in his gaze made her stomach drop. Not fear, not anger, but raw, blazing possession. Not the kind that seeks to own, the kind that is terrified of losing. She walked into the elevator. The doors closed. Minho turned to Junwoo. "I want Kwon Yun-woo watched. Every meeting, every call, every movement. If he goes near her again..." "Understood," Junwoo said. And he didn't ask clarifying questions because none were needed. That night, a typhoon warning hit Seoul. The city darkened under walls of clouds so thick they swallowed the skyline. Wind tore through the streets, bending trees sideways, sending debris skittering across empty roads. Rain came in sheets, horizontal, blinding, relentless. Adiz was trapped at Kang Tower. The trains had stopped. Taxis had vanished. The building's staff had been told to shelter in place. She sat in the rehabilitation suite on the 47th floor, wrapped in the cashmere blanket he'd given her, drinking the hibiscus tea he'd stocked, trying to read a medical journal and failing because every sentence became his face. The door opened. Minho walked in, no suit jacket, no guards. Just him. In a black shirt, sleeves rolled, his hair slightly damp from walking through the corridor near the loading bay where the wind reached. He stopped when he saw her, wrapped in his blanket, drinking the tea he'd provided, surrounded by the space he'd built for her. Something in his expression broke open. "The storm is bad," he said. "You shouldn't be alone up here." "I'm fine. You're shivering." She was. She hadn't noticed until he said it. The building's heating system had faltered under the storm's assault, and the rehabilitation suite, all glass and steel, held cold like a cage. He crossed the room, picked up the remote for the heating panel, and adjusted it. Then he sat on the couch, not next to her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. They sat in silence. Outside, the typhoon screamed. "Tell me about your brother," he said. She looked at him. His voice was different tonight. The edges were gone. The walls were down. The storm outside had stripped something away, and what was left was just a man, sitting in the dark with a woman he wanted more than air. So she told him. She told him about Emeka, 24 years old, bright, funny, the only family she had left after their parents' accident. She told him about the diagnosis, the rare cardiac defect that had stolen his future in a single doctor's appointment. She told him about the nights she'd worked double shifts in London, the savings she'd drained, the fear that lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. She told him about her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd given her the bird pendant, who'd told her that love wasn't a feeling but a decision made every morning to stay. She died 2 years ago, Hadiz said softly. And sometimes I feel like I've been running ever since, running from grief, running toward Emika's surgery, running from anything that might make me stop and feel the weight of everything I've lost. Minho listened, not the way powerful men usually listened, half attentive, waiting for their turn to speak. He listened with his entire body, leaned slightly toward her, eyes on her face, absorbing every word like it was sacred text. When she finished, the silence was different, warm, shared, a shelter within the storm. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said. She laughed, a broken, watery sound. "I'm a mess. You're magnificent." No humor in his voice, no performance. Just the raw, unvarnished truth spoken by a man who had forgotten how to lie to her. She looked at HMM. The distance between them on the couch had shrunk without either of them moving. Or maybe they had moved, drawn together by the same invisible gravity that had been pulling them since the first day. "Minho," she whispered, "I can't do this." "Why?" "Because you're my patient. Because you're powerful and I'm temporary. Because when this contract ends, I go back to London and you stay here in your tower with your empire and your enemies, and I'll be the nurse who, you will never be just a nurse to me." His voice was low, fierce, shaking with something he'd been holding back for weeks. "You are the only person in my life who sees me. Not the name, not the empire, not the fear. Me. The man underneath all of it. The broken man who couldn't feel anything for 3 years until you put your hands on him and brought him back to life." Lightning cracked outside, flooding the room with white light. He was offering her like a weapon placed handle first in her hands. Every scar, every shadow, every ounce of vulnerability he was offering her like a weapon placed handle first in her hands. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "I'm asking you, begging you, don't. But I am asking you, begging you, don't." The thunder came. Deep, rolling, shaking the glass walls. And in the darkness after the flash, Hadiz Okafor made a decision. She reached for him. Her hand found his jaw, rough with stubble, clenched with tension. She felt him shudder under her touch. Not from pain, not from nerve damage. From the sheer, overwhelming sensation of being touched by someone he loved with a desperation that bordered on religious. She leaned in. He met her halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was not tentative. It was the collision of two people who had been fighting gravity for weeks and had finally, beautifully, catastrophically surrendered to it. His hands found her waist, pulled her closer, trembling as they traced the curve of her hips with a reverence that made her gasp against his mouth. Her fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him deeper, tasting the whiskey on his lips and the longing beneath it. The storm raged outside. Inside, a different storm broke. He pulled back just enough to look at her, flushed, breathless, luminous, and the expression on his face was one of pure, shattered wonder. "I can feel everything," he whispered. "Hadiz, I can feel everything." She pressed her forehead to his. Tears she couldn't stop rolled down her cheeks, and he kissed each one away with a tenderness that contradicted every terrifying story ever told about him. He lifted her, carefully, powerfully, as though she weighed nothing, as though she was everything, and carried her toward the private suite adjoining the treatment room. The door closed behind them. The storm swallowed every sound, and what happened in that room, slow, overwhelming, achingly tender, healed something in both of them that no medicine ever could. Fade to black. Hadiz woke before dawn. The storm had passed. Seoul glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, washed clean, the first pale light of morning turning the skyline silver. Minho slept beside her. Actually slept. Something Junwoo would later tell her he hadn't done without medication in 3 years. His face was relaxed. The hard lines softened. One arm draped across her waist as though even in sleep he refused to let go. She looked at him, at the scar on his neck, at the rise and fall of his chest, at the hand resting on her hip, the hand that had touched her with such fierce gentleness that she'd cried and laughed and shattered all at once. And then the terror set in. What had she done? He was her patient. She'd crossed every professional line. She'd compromised her integrity, her contract, her entire career. And worse than all of it, She'd given herself to a man who lived in a world of enemies, violence, and power. A man whose empire could crush her without even noticing. A man who would wake up in the light of day and see clearly what the storm had blurred, that she was temporary, a foreign nurse, a body he'd needed in a moment of vulnerability. He would regret this. She was sure of it. Men like him, men who ruled worlds, didn't fall in love with women like her. Not permanently. Not in the daylight. She slid out from under his arm, dressed in silence, picked up her bag with shaking hands. She paused at the door and looked back at him one last time, sleeping, peaceful, beautiful in a way that made her chest physically ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she left. Min-ho woke 20 minutes later to an empty bed in a cold space where her warmth had been. He sat up, looked around the room, called her name. Silence. He grabbed his phone, called Junwoo. "Where is she?" Junwoo's voice was groggy. "What? Who? It's 5 in the... Adiz, where is she? Now." The urgency in his voice snapped Junwoo fully awake. "Give me 2 minutes." It took 90 seconds. She left the building 14 minutes ago, took a taxi from the east entrance, heading toward Gangnam, her apartment, most likely. Min-ho was already dressing, pulling on clothes with hands that shook. Not from weakness, not from nerve damage, but from a fear so deep it made the night of his shooting feel like a paper cut. She'd run. She'd woken up next to him and she'd run, and he would burn down every bridge in Seoul before he let her disappear. He arrived at her apartment building in Gangnam 22 minutes later. Black car, no driver. He'd driven himself, something he hadn't done in years. Junwoo followed in a second vehicle, protesting through the phone the entire way. The building's security guard recognized the name Kang and went pale. Min-ho didn't wait for the elevator. He took the stairs, 4 flights, 2 at a time, and knocked on her door. No answer. He knocked again. Adiz. Open the door. Nothing. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing. Open the door or I'll stand here until the building calls the police, and then I'll buy the building and fire the security guard and stand here anyway." A long, terrible silence. Then the door opened. She stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her braids loose around her shoulders, her eyes red, her expression a war between relief and resolve. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You shouldn't have left. Min-ho, you left." His voice cracked on the word, and the crack destroyed her. "You were in my arms and I could feel you breathing against my chest, and for the first time in 3 years I slept. Actually slept, and I woke up and you were gone. Do you understand what that did to me?" She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook. "I got scared," she whispered through her fingers. "I woke up and I saw you and I thought, he's going to regret this. When the sun comes up and the storm is over and reality sets in, he's going to look at me and see a mistake, a lapse, a foreign nurse who..." "Stop." He stepped forward, took her hand away from her mouth, held it in both of his. "Look at me." She looked. "You are not a mistake. You are not a lapse. You are not temporary." His voice was steady now, but his eyes were liquid, raw, stripped of every defense he'd ever built. "You are the reason I'm alive, not breathing, not functioning, but alive. And if you think I'm going to let you walk away because you're afraid I won't choose you in the daylight, then you don't know me at all." He dropped to his knees. Right there in the doorway of her modest Gangnam apartment, Kang Min-ho, the most feared man in Seoul, dropped to his knees in front of her, pressed his forehead against her hands and held on. "Don't leave me," he said, and the words came out broken, shattered, wholly. "I've survived bullets. I've survived betrayal. I've survived betrayal. I've survived 3 years of feeling nothing, but I will not survive you walking away." She sank to her knees in front of him, cupped his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, his cheeks, the scar on his neck, the corner of his mouth. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm here." He pulled her against his chest and held her so tightly the world could have ended outside, and neither of them would have noticed. In the hallway, Junwoo stood guard, arms crossed, pretending he wasn't moved. He failed. The peace lasted 6 days. 6 days of a new reality. Adiz staying at the tower, no longer in the separate apartment. Min Ho installing her in the private residence on the top floor, over her protests. Breakfasts together in the penthouse kitchen where he cooked for her. Badly, earnestly, with a concentration that made her laugh until she cried. Evening walks on the rooftop garden, his hand always at the small of her back, his eyes scanning the perimeter even as he listened to her talk about her childhood in Nigeria. 6 days of healing, his body continuing to regenerate, his spirit softening, his laughter returning in small, startled bursts that surprised everyone who heard it, especially him. 6 days of falling deeper. On the 7th day, Kwon Yun-woo made his move. It started with a tabloid leak, a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, showing Min Ho and Adiz on the rooftop garden, his hand on her back, her head tilted toward him. An intimate moment stolen by a telephoto lens. The headline, Kang Crime Empire Boss in Secret Affair with Foreign Nurse. Sources say she's been hired to treat more than his injuries. The article was vicious. It painted Adiz as a gold digger, a seductress, a woman who had targeted a vulnerable man for financial gain. It referenced her brother's surgery, information that was supposed to be private, and twisted it into evidence of manipulation. It went viral by noon. Adiz saw it on her phone during lunch. She read the article once, then again, then set the phone down carefully, as though it were made of glass, and pressed her grandmother's pendant so hard it left an imprint on her palm. Min Ho found out 12 minutes later when Jun-woo burst into his office with a tablet. The reaction was nuclear. "Find out who leaked the photo," Min Ho said, his voice so calm it was terrifying. "Find out who sold the story, find out which outlet published it, and find out Kwon Yun-woo's connection to all three." It took Jun-woo's team 4 hours. The trail led exactly where Min Ho expected, to Kwon Hyun-woo's media contacts, his investment in the tabloid's parent company, and a mole inside Kang Tower who had been feeding information to Kwon's people for weeks. The mole was identified. A junior security guard on the 32nd floor. He was removed within the hour, quietly, permanently in terms of employment. But the damage was done, the story was out, and Adiz was paying the price. That evening, Min Ho found her in the rehabilitation suite, sitting on the treatment table, staring at nothing. Her eyes were dry. Her face was composed. But her hands, those steady, capable hands that had healed him, were shaking. "I've seen the article," she said before he could speak. "I've also seen the comments. Apparently I'm a prostitute, a witch doctor, and a diversity hire, depending on which forum you read." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, took her trembling hands in his. "I will destroy every person responsible for this," he said. "The tabloid will retract. Kwon Hyun-woo will regret the day he looked in your direction, and anyone who speaks your name with anything less than respect will answer to me personally." She looked at him. "This is what I was afraid of. Your world, Min Ho. It eats people. It took a private, beautiful thing and turned it into ammunition. Then I'll change my world. No hesitation. No caveat. A statement of absolute intent. I'll burn the parts that threaten you and rebuild what's left. You can't change what you are. Watch me." He stood, pulled out his phone, called a number that very few people on Earth had access to. "Director Kwon Hyun-woo," he said into the phone. "You have 48 hours to retract the article, issue a public apology, and dissolve your shares in the media company that published it. If you don't, I will release the full financial audit of Kwon Pharmaceuticals, including the tax evasion records, the bribery documentation, and the clinical trial falsification from 2019. 48 hours. Starting now." He hung up. Adiz stared at him. "You had that information already." "I have information on everyone. It's how I've survived." "And you would use it? Burn a man's empire?" He looked at her with eyes that held no uncertainty, no conflict, no mercy. "For you, I would burn the world." She should have been frightened by that, by the scale of it, by the ruthlessness. Instead, she felt, for the first time since seeing the article, safe. Kwon Hyun-woo did not comply in 48 hours. Instead, he escalated. 3 days after Min Ho's ultimatum, Adiz left the tower for a scheduled visit to a medical supply store in Myeongdong. She was accompanied by a single bodyguard. a concession she'd insisted on, refusing the full security detail that Minho had wanted. She never reached the store. The call came at 2:47 p.m., Junwoo's voice, tight with controlled urgency. The guard is down, hospitalized. 3 men in a black van. They took her from the parking structure on the corner of. Minho didn't hear the rest. The phone slipped from his hand. His vision tunneled. His heartbeat became a war drum. For 3 seconds, the longest 3 seconds of his life, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The world reduced to a single annihilating truth. She was gone. Someone had taken her. Someone had put their hands on the woman he loved and dragged her into a van, and she was gone. Then the fear became fury, and the fury became something ancient, primal, and absolutely without limit. He picked up the phone. Mobilize everything, every team, every resource, every contact in the police, the government, and the underground. I want her found within 3 hours, or I will personally dismantle Kwon Yun-woo's organization brick by brick and bury him under the rubble. 3 hours, Jun-woo. Not a minute more. The next 3 hours were the most violent, most coordinated, and most terrifying display of power Seoul's underworld had seen in a decade. Minho's network activated like a machine of war. Surveillance feeds were seized. Traffic cameras were hacked. Informants across 6 districts were contacted simultaneously. 3 of Kwon's known associates were located and questioned with an intensity that produced results within minutes. Minho didn't sit in his office and wait. He was in the field, in the back of an armored SUV, Junwoo beside him, directing operations through 3 phones while his hands shook with a rage so pure it had its own gravitational pull. At the 2-hour mark, they found her location, an abandoned pharmaceutical warehouse on the outskirts of Incheon, Kwon's facility, Kwon's territory. Minho was out of the SUV before it fully stopped. The warehouse was dark, cold, and smelled of chemicals. Adi sat in a metal chair in a back room, her hands bound in front of her with zip ties, a bruise forming on her left cheekbone where one of the men had struck her when she'd fought back. Because of course she'd fought back. She'd broken one man's nose and bitten another's hand before they'd overpowered her. Kwon Hyun-woo stood across from her, his polished mask cracked, sweat on his temples, the desperation of a man who had made a catastrophic miscalculation leaking through every pore. "This isn't personal," he said, pacing. "Your leverage. Kang Min-ho has documents that will destroy my company. All I need is for him to hand them over and you go free. Simple." Adiz looked at him with the same calm, unflinching gaze she'd given Minho on the first day, the gaze that said, "I have walked through worse than you. You kidnapped the woman Kang Minho loves," she said, her voice steady despite the bruise, despite the fear, despite the zip ties cutting into her wrists. "And you think this ends with a negotiation?" Something in Yun-woo's expression flickered, the first whisper of understanding that he had made a mistake. Not even his money could fix. The wall exploded, not literally, but the doors burst inward with such force that the sound was indistinguishable from an explosion. Minho's men poured in, tactical, precise, overwhelming. Hyun-woo's guards were disarmed in seconds, and then Minho was there. He walked through the chaos like it didn't exist, past the shouting men, past the overturned furniture, past Kwon Hyun-woo, who was being forced to his knees by Jun-woo, with an efficiency that suggested he'd been looking forward to it. Minho stopped in front of Adiz, looked at her face. So the breeze. Something in his eyes died and was reborn as something infinitely more dangerous. He pulled a blade from his belt, small, razor-sharp, and cut the zip ties from her wrists with surgical precision. Then he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands trembling, his jaw so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. "Are you hurt?" His voice was barely human, raw, shredded. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again. "I'm okay, Minho, I'm okay. Look at me." He looked at her, and the mask, every layer of it, every year of it, dissolved. His forehead dropped against hers. His hands cupped her face. His breathing was ragged, broken, the breathing of a man who had just walked to the edge of an abyss and looked down. "I will never let anyone touch you again," he whispered. "Never. Do you hear me? Never." She wrapped her arms around him and held on. in the middle of the warehouse. Surrounded by armed men and a defeated enemy, she held the most dangerous man in Seoul while he fell apart in her arms. Behind them, Junwoo hauled Kwon Hyun-woo to his feet. "You're finished," he said simply, and he was. Within 72 hours, Kwon Pharmaceuticals would be under federal investigation. The falsified clinical trials would be exposed. The media empire would crumble, and Kwon Hyun-woo would disappear into a legal nightmare from which he would never emerge. Min-ho carried Adiz to the SUV. She protested. He ignored her. He held her the entire drive back, his face buried in her hair, her scent, coconut and vanilla and rain, filling his lungs like oxygen after drowning. She was safe. She was his, and he would never ever let her go. A week after the rescue, Min-ho called a meeting. Not a business meeting. Not a syndicate strategy session. A different kind of meeting entirely. He stood in the penthouse of Kang Tower, the private residence that had become their home, and faced Adiz across the living room. She was wearing one of his shirts over her own clothes, a habit she'd developed that made his heart do things he would never admit to Junwoo. Her braids were down, cascading over her shoulders. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a pale shadow. Her eyes were clear, warm, and fixed on him with an expression of wary anticipation. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand." Stubborn woman. Impossible man. The ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Then it faded into something more serious, more vulnerable, more terrifying for a man who had conquered fear itself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Black velvet. The kind that holds a specific type of question. Adiz's hand flew to her mouth. "I had a speech," he said, his voice rough. "Junwoo helped me write it. It was eloquent, persuasive, had statistics about successful cross-cultural marriages. He thought that would appeal to your scientific mind." Despite everything, she laughed, a choked, beautiful, watery laugh. "But I forgot the speech the moment you walked into the room," he continued, "because every time I look at you, I forget everything except the fact that I want to spend the rest of my life being the man you deserve." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, not gaudy, but breathtaking. A deep amber stone set in a gold band, flanked by 2 smaller diamonds. The amber was the exact color of the flecks in his eyes that she'd first noticed during that storm-lit session weeks ago. "I know what I am," he said. "I know the world I come from. I know it's dangerous and dark and nothing like the life you planned. But I also know that I have never been more myself than when I'm with you. You didn't just heal my body, Adiz. You healed everything. The parts I'd given up on, the parts I thought were dead." He dropped to one knee. "Marry me, not because I can give you an empire, but because I can give you me, every broken, healing, obsessive, jealous, desperately in love piece of me. For the rest of my life." She was crying. Not delicately, fully, messily, beautifully, the way she did everything. Tears streaming, nose running, shoulders shaking, the biggest smile he'd ever seen breaking through the tears like sunrise through storm clouds. "You are the most infuriating man I have ever met," she said through the tears. "Is that a yes?" She crossed the room in 3 steps, dropped to her knees in front of him, and kissed him so deeply that the world outside, the empire, the enemies, the tabloids, the distance between their worlds, ceased to exist entirely. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, because of course it did. He'd had Junwoo measure her ring size while she slept 3 nights ago, a covert operation that Junwoo had described as the most stressful mission of my career, and I once defused a bomb. Min-ho held her hand, the hand wearing his ring, and pressed it to his chest, over his heart. "Feel that?" he said. She nodded. His heart was pounding, strong, alive, hers. "You did that," he whispered. "You brought me back." The wedding was held 3 months later. It was small, deliberately, defiantly small. Not because Min-ho couldn't afford grandeur, but because Adiz wanted intimacy, and he would have married her in a parking lot if she'd asked. The ceremony took place in the rooftop garden of Kang Tower at sunset, the Seoul skyline blazing gold and pink behind them. Adiz wore a dress that merged Korean and Nigerian traditions, white silk with delicate embroidery inspired by Igbo bridal patterns, her braids woven with gold thread, her grandmother's bird pendant around her neck. Minho wore black, because of course he did. But the look on his face when she walked toward him, escorted by her brother Emeka, healthy, post-surgery, grinning, was the softest, most unguarded, most purely joyful expression anyone in his organization had ever seen on him. Junwoo was the best man, he cried. He denied it later. There were photographs. Emeka gave a toast that made everyone laugh in Adi's sob. He called Minho the scariest brother-in-law in human history and said, "But my sister could take him in a fight, and we all know it." Minho nodded in agreement. They danced to a song Adis chose, a slow, swaying Nigerian melody that her grandmother used to hum. Minho held her close, his hands splayed across the curve of her lower back, his lips at her temple. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what? For not trembling." She pulled back to look at him, confused. He smiled, the full, real, devastating smile she'd worked so hard to earn. "The first day, when you walked into my room, I told Junwoo that if the new nurse trembled, he should send her home. You didn't tremble. You told me to stop glaring." She laughed. "You were very intimidating. You were very unimpressed." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But my grandmother always told me, never let a man see you shake, stand tall, let him wonder." "I'm still wondering," he said. "I plan to spend the next 60 years wondering about you." She kissed him. The rooftop erupted in cheers, from Junwoo, from Imeka, from Shion, from the small circle of people who loved them. 5 months after the wedding, on a quiet morning in the penthouse, Adiz sat on the edge of their bed holding a small white test. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable. She pressed her grandmother's pendant, closed her eyes, breathed. When Minho walked in, fresh from a meeting, already loosening his tie, already scanning the room for her the way he always did, as though she were true north and he was permanently, happily lost, she held up the test without a word. He stopped in the doorway, looked at the test, looked at her face, looked at the test again, then Kang Minho, the most feared man in Seoul, the Mafia boss who had conquered enemies, survived bullets, and rebuilt his empire, sat down on the floor, right there, in the doorway, his back against the frame, his hands over his face. She went to him, knelt beside him, pulled his hands away. He was crying, not silently, not stoically, crying the way a man cries when he has been given something so precious, so impossibly undeserved, that the only appropriate response is complete surrender. "I thought I was dead," he whispered. 3 years ago I thought everything was dead, and now you're going to be a father," she said softly, wiping his tears with her thumbs the way he'd once wiped hers. He pulled her into his arms, held her with the desperate, reverent, all-consuming tenderness of a man who had been given back his life twice, once by her hands, once by her love. "I will protect you both," he said against her hair, "with everything I am, with everything I have, until my last breath." She smiled against his chest. "I know, but for now, you should probably get off the floor." He laughed, broken and whole at the same time, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. Outside the penthouse windows, Seoul stretched into the distance, vast, glittering, alive. Below them, the empire hummed. Around them, the world continued its complicated, dangerous, beautiful turning. But in that room, in the space between 2 people who had found each other against every odd, across every border, through every storm, there was only this, a heartbeat, a promise, a beginning, and love, fierce, stubborn, impossible, healing love that had conquered everything. Besties, if this story made your heart race, your eyes water, and your soul ache, then you already know what to do. Smash that like button like Minho smashed through that warehouse door. Share this with every friend who deserves a love story this intense, and subscribe to Black Seoul Romance TV series so you never miss a story. Drop a ring in the comments if you believe in love that heals. Drop a fire if you want more stories like this. ***, drop the name of the next country you want our female lead to be from. We'll see you in the next episode, besties. Stay dangerous, stay soft, stay in love.